The former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, has arrived at La Santé prison in Paris, where he'll serve a 5-year sentence for conspiring to raise election funds from Libya.
In the heart of Paris, this is where power once glimmered like gold beneath the chandeliers of the Élysée Palace. A shadow now falls on the legacy of a man who once ruled France. Paris once bathed in glory, but is now clouded by scandal.
Nicolas Sarkozy, the guy who was once the most powerful man in France, to suddenly find himself living here.
Nicolas Sarkozy, president from 2007 to 2012, now stands before the same republic he once led. He is accused of taking 50 million euros from the late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi to fuel his 2007 presidential campaign. 50 million US dollars in shadows, power purchased, and destiny borrowed. It all began in 2005. This is when Sarkozy was the Minister of the Interior. He met Gaddafi in Tripoli under the ban of diplomacy. But behind the handshakes, investigators say there moved suitcases of cash. Behind the smiles, money changed hands unseen and unspoken. September 25, 2025, the Paris Criminal Court delivered its verdict. Sarkozy guilty. He is sentenced to 5 years in prison. Out of the 5, 2 are to be served behind the bars. From the palace to prison, history bends toward justice. From Gaddafi's golden tents to the cold iron gates of a French prison, this is not just the fall of a man, it is the poetry of justice itself. And every empire ends with a silence. In the autumn of 2005, Nicolas Sarkozy journeyed to Tripoli, and there, diplomacy and desire intertwined. It is in Tripoli where ambition met temptation. For decades, France and Libya shared a complex dance: oil and arms, suspicion and cooperation, oil and arms, and uneasy friendship. In 2007, Gaddafi brought his desert tent to Paris, a gesture of reconciliation and a show of power. The tent rose in Paris, and history watched in disbelief. But beneath the surface of smiles, Libya's intelligence chief Abdullah Senussi reached out to French intermediaries. The whispered promise: 50 million euros for Sarkozy's rise. A promise of gold beneath the desert dust. A promise of 50 million euros made Sarkozy to whisper. He promised to rehabilitate Libya. And Libya under Muammar Gaddafi wished for legitimacy. And those men, both of them found what they sought, at least for a while. Because power, like the desert sun, it blinds those who chase it. And so our story begins with a silent promise in a palace of sand, the beginning of betrayal. The year was 2006. This is when power whispered through the corridors of power, and it was the beginning of the calm before the storm. A document signed by Moussa Koussa pledged 50 million euros from Libya to Sarkozy's campaign. 50 million euros. This was the price of a presidency. And arms dealer Zayad Takeden later claimed to have carried that cash from Tripoli to Paris. Suitcases of money. They were the veins of corruption. And fast forward, Sarkozy triumphed in May 2007, and Gaddafi arrived that December pitching his tent at the Élysée Palace. These were the friendships celebrated beneath the French flag. But when the Arab Spring arrived in 2011, Sarkozy turned his cannon toward his formerly ally Muammar Gaddafi, and the friendship became the target. What happened behind the velvet curtains will echo years later in the marble halls of justice. whispers of the past will become verdicts of the future. In the spring of 2011, as flames of revolt swept across the Arab world, France under Sarkozy seized its moment. The mission to protect civilians in Libya, but behind the public banner lay old debts and darker contracts. Sarkozy had once rolled out red carpet diplomacy for Muammar Gaddafi, the desert tent in Paris, the handshake in Tripoli, the oil and arms deals. But now, the tyrant he once embraced became the target he helped to destroy. The French-led operation, codenamed Operation Harmattan, it was launched on 19th March 2011, and this marked France's direct intervention. In October of that same year, Gaddafi was captured and killed by rebel fighters. A reign of 4 decades ended beneath concrete rubble and blood-stained desert road. The irony is as sharp as a dagger. The very man whose campaign whispered of Gaddafi's cash-filled suitcases became the architect of the regime's collapse. The allies turned clients, the friendship turned siege, the handshake that became a noose. What began in covert meetings and secret ledgers ended in bomb blasts and dictators' demise. Sarkozy's decision to turn on his former benefactor reveals the shadow currents of power, one where favors are owed, debts repaid in blood, and alliances built on sand. And so the chapter closes not with a kiss, but a gunshot echoing across Libya and Paris. A friend becomes an executioner. A handshake becomes the fate of a palace. Sarkozy, the man who had once welcomed Gaddafi to Paris with the honors, he echoed the call that the dictator must fall. And indeed, the dictator fell. The very regime that had allegedly bankrolled his ascent was toppled, and Muammar Gaddafi was dead. But the cost of that ascent will come due. In the years that followed, investigators sifted through notebooks of the Libyan oil minister, witness statements, memos pointing to a pact sealed in 2005 that may have promised 50 million euros from the Libyan to Sarkozy's campaign. And by 2023 to 2024, the storm was fully unleashed. Sarkozy, now a former president, stood indicted in multiple legal cases: campaign, finance irregularities, influence peddling, and the Central Libya affair. On January 6, 2025, the trial formally opened. Sarkozy faced charges of passive corruption, illegal campaign financing, criminal association, facing up to 10 years behind the bars. On March 27th, prosecutors asked for a 7-year sentence and a fine of 300,000 euros, warning of a Faucian pact between France's former leader and the Libyan dictator. The verdict emerged on September 25, 2025. Sarkozy was found guilty of criminal association. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, becoming the first modern French president to face such a fate. On October 21, 2025, Sarkozy entered prison, a silent procession of consequence. And so the arc bends, from desert tents to cell bars, from handshakes over oil deals to a gavel behind closed doors. Through 13 years, the threads of power, friendship, betrayal, and justice wove a tapestry that even the grandest stage of the Élysée couldn't shelter. And in the end, the golden handshake dissolved in the grey dawn of accountability. Once, he stood as France's youngest president, the reformer, the modernizer, the man who promised to restore the nation's pride. But today, Nicolas Sarkozy stands as a reminder that power without conscience is a slow descent into shadow. From the deserts of Tripoli to the chambers of the Élysée, From handshake to handcuffs, the story of Sarkozy and Gaddafi is written in the ink of irony. The red mic leaves you with one truth. In politics, there are no eternal friends, only eternal interests. And every debt, whether paid in gold or blood, it is one day collected. This is the red mic.